I will make this lecture more concise. We'll just cut some topics away, right? So we will just introduce this one important game that can help us to understand fairness concerns by people and introduce this idea of social preferences, right? So I will just leave social norms and in-group favoritism out from today's lecture. I'll put the slides there, but they are not required for the exam, right? So just these two topics. Ultimatum game and social preferences. What is ultimatum game? So this is a quite interesting game. I planned for you to play in class, but for the sake of time, we did not have time to play. So basically, this is a two-player game, but it's a sequential game. So we have two players. One player is the proposer. The other player is the responder, right? So the proposer would propose how to divide a certain money, right? So the proposer would give an amount of money and propose how to divide this money. And this proposal of this so-called pie division is a take or leave it offer to the responder, to the second player, right? And the second player can decide whether the second player can only decide whether to accept the proposal or to reject the proposal. So for example, in this case, I'm the proposer, I have $10 to divide. And then I propose that I will keep $9 to me and give $1 to you. As a responder, you decide whether you accept this proposal or reject it. If you accept it, then I keep the $5, you keep the $1. If you reject it, then none of us receive anything. So that is the so-called ultimatum. So it's like I put this so-called ultimatum offer, then you can decide whether to accept it or not, right? So you have no way to change this offer. You can only decide to accept it or decide to reject it. Now, consider this sequential game. What is the likely outcome? You didn't have the chance to play, so you have to put yourself into the shoes of the player. Suppose you are playing this game. What if you are the proposer? What offer are you likely to propose? If you are the responder, what kind of offer would induce you to accept? What kind of offer would induce you to reject? So that's the question to think about, right? So what is the likely outcome? And also another related question is, what is the Nash equilibrium in this game? So this is a sequential game, and it's different from the previous game that we have discussed so far. In the previous game, the players would decide their actions simultaneously. Here, the proposers first propose a proposal, and then the responder would then decide to accept or reject. Right? So in a sequential game like this, well, we are not a course on game theory, so I will not get too deep on the analysis of Nash equilibrium. So, but for a sequential game, the way to obtain the Nash equilibrium is to use backward induction, right? So to understand this game, let me first get back to the example I gave you, right? Suppose I'm the proposer. I decide to keep $9 to me and give you only $1. Now the question for you as the responder, are you willing to accept this offer? Now, maybe I will take it to another extreme. I will keep $9.99 to me, and I just give you 1 cent. Are you willing to accept this offer? So if we assume people are rational and they only care about the monetary payoffs, my proposal that only give you 1 cent and keep the rest to myself will be accepted. You will accept this offer. Why is this the case? Because having 1 cent, of course, does not make you too much better off, but it's better for you compared to receiving nothing, right? So the Nash equilibrium, assuming people are rational and care only about the monetary payoff, in this game is that the proposer will propose the minimum amount sent to the responder, and the responder would accept that amount. So that is the Nash equilibrium. But will that be the likely outcome? You probably would sense that giving you 1 cent and keep the rest to myself would be too greedy for me and too unfair. So for most people, will be likely to reject that offer, right? So Nash equilibrium in this case is not a good prediction of behavior, all right? So let's look at the experimental result. So this is from another in-class experiment. So here in this experiment, I give the proposers 40 francs to divide. Instead of $10, there are 40 francs. And here is the distribution of the offers. We see that in drastic contrast to Nash equilibrium prediction, none of the proposers proposed the minimum amount to the responder, right? So the prediction would be just give 1 franc to the responder and keep the rest for yourself. Instead, we see the most frequent offers is equal split. Give 20 francs to the responder and keep 20 francs to myself, right? And then on the right, it documents the behavior of the responder. So instead of giving you a different amount, I ask the responder to decide whether to accept or not. In the experiment, I ask the responder to indicate the minimum acceptable offer, meaning that before looking at the offers of the proposer, you just indicate the minimum acceptable offer. If the actual offer is higher than your minimum acceptable offer, then you will accept that offer. If it's lower, then you will reject that offer so that the responder, you as a responder and the proposer would receive nothing. So here is the distribution of that minimum acceptable offer. So as we can see here, we do see some rational behaviors. So maybe one student decided to indicate the minimum amount, which is 1 franc. But again, the most frequent minimum acceptable offer is actually of the fair and equal split, right? So here I can tell you that most beneficial minimum acceptable offer is just 1 franc, because that would guarantee you to get something, right? Suppose the other person just proposed 5 francs to you and 35 francs kept to themselves. If you indicate 20 as the minimum acceptable offer, you are actually giving up that 5 francs, right? So the rational behavior for people who care only about the monetary payoff is just to indicate 1 as the minimum acceptable offer. But we do see most people indicate 20 equal split. So this is telling us that monetary payoff is not the only thing that people care about. So that's how we introduce this concept of fairness, right? And why we need to understand people's concern for fairness and also the so-called social preferences, right? So that's what we will discuss. So here is a plot demonstrating the proportion of offers rejected depending on the shares offered to the receiver, right? Based on previous study, not from the in-class experiment. So we see here that if the offer is very low, these low offers are very likely to be rejected, right? So this means that people are not willing to accept very low mean offer that are unfair, right? So this demonstrates that people are willing to sacrifice some of the monetary payoffs for fairness. So here is a summary of the results from previous studies on ultimatum game. We see the medium and the model offers are 40 to 50%. A lot of them are fair equal split at 50%. And the mean offer is 30 to 40%. You see that the proposers are actually still selfish, right? So they will try to keep more to themselves. And offers below 20% are rejected about half of the time. So this can be considered as unfair offers, and the responders are willing to sacrifice some of the monetary payoffs to reject this unfairness. And we also see that if we increase the stakes of the pie, right? It's difficult to pay a huge amount of money, but this experiment was conducted at the less developed countries where the pie the money to be split is worth 2 months or 3 months of the incomes of the corresponding participant. And we also notice that this high stakes does not change the result. So why do proposers offer an equal split in the ultimatum game? We see the model offer is actually 50%. Is it because they are fair-minded, they're altruistic towards the responder, or they are just fear the rejections of low offers being strategic so that they are able to maximize their payoff? Okay. So these are two explanations. These two explanations can be disentangled by a dictator game. So a dictator game is similar to ultimatum game, but the difference is that the responder cannot respond to the proposer's offer, right? So they can only accept. They have no option to reject, right? So in a sense, a dictator game is not a game. It's just one dictator decide how to allocate money between themselves and the receiver, right? So basically, dictator game is just ultimatum game where the responder's ability to reject the offer is removed. They can only accept the offer, right? So in general, a dictator game is just a player, which is assigned as a dictator, is given an amount of money and decide how much to keep and how much to send to the other player, and the other players have to accept. And because the dictator game is non-strategic, right? So you are not afraid of that your offer are being rejected by the responder. So it offers some the positive offers would suggest altruism, meaning that any positive offer in the dictator game is probably reflecting fair-minded altruism, right? And the difference between dictator game offer and ultimatum game offer probably is a matter of how strategic the corresponding proposer is, right? So let's look at some of the statistics from this corresponding dictator game. The mean allocation in comparable dictator game is 20%, right? So this is positive, meaning that even without the fear of being rejected, they are still giving some money to the receiver, meaning that they are probably altruistic, right? So this shows some pure altruism. But depending on the experimental conditions, this 20% can be lower. If in double-blinded condition, meaning that in the experiment, for example, in the lab experiment or in-class experiment, your decisions are anonymous. But still, if the experimenters can check the data, even though they don't know your real name, but they know what you have done, that concern of your image may motivate you to do something consistent with the social norm. Well, in some experimental condition, these concerns for image can be completely eliminated. That is the so-called double-blinded condition. So this experiment is conducted by you, the dictator, the player, would be given an envelope with $10, right? And then this corresponding participant would just go to a corner, right, that no one would be able to see, and they get out this $10 and keep whatever amount they want to themselves and put the same amount of white paper into a bag into the envelope so that the thickness of the envelope is the same as before. So experimenters cannot tell how much you actually make the offer. Right? And also the other envelope that you take away, also with white papers, and also some of the money is yours to keep. So in this case, it's eliminate the concern that so the experimenter will never know who made the corresponding offers, and they can never identify. So that's the double-blinded condition. If you eliminate these concerns for image and make these offers completely anonymous, is only 10%, right? But again, 10% is still positive, right? So that demonstrates some pure altruism. And that means these proposers in ultimatum game are both strategic, they are providing more to avoid rejection, and also at the same time altruistic, right? So 10% probably is being altruistic, and the difference between the offer in ultimatum game which is 40 to 50%, is 30 to 40% actually, compared to 10% that is being strategic. Right? So the proposers in ultimatum game, they are both altruistic and strategic. Right? So some sophisticated analysis show that the actual offers in ultimatum game are more generous than payoff maximizing offer. This given the actual patterns of rejection, right? So you can see the patterns of rejection and see whether the proposers are actually maximizing the expected payoff given the probability of rejection. But it has demonstrated that the offer is more generous than payoff maximizing offer, meaning that, again, another indicator that proposers are both strategic and payoff maximizing and also altruistic. They want to give more to the corresponding receivers. Again, demonstrating these social preferences, right? So care not only the monetary payoff, but of your own, but you also probably care about the other person's outcome. So these statistics from ultimatum game are mainly from data from experiment conducted in the United States and other Western countries recruiting college students. But can these offers differ across cultures, especially in some cultures that are not Western? I mean, it's small tribes, right? So here is one interesting study that conduct this ultimatum game among 15 small-scale societies. And it has been demonstrated that cultures with more cooperative activities in those small tribes, like they have this collective hunting for whales and big games, and also the societies with some kind of market integration, they have sharing norms closer to equal split compared to other societies, whereas many agriculture that without those cultures without market integration, the offer is lower. Right? So here are the corresponding ultimatum game offers. So the size of dot represent the frequency of the corresponding offers, and the bar represent the average offer by the proposer. I mean, here, one interesting observation is this Lima Lara whales of Indonesia offers more than half. You recall that stack hunt game, right? So in the stack hunt game, we mentioned this Lima Lara whalers as an example. This whale hunting is a situation of stack hunt game. So in those society, we observe a quite interesting phenomena, which is called this hyper fair offer. Right? So in this society, they offer more than half. And interestingly, those hyper fair offers are often rejected. I mean, this is a very cultural phenomenon, right? Because this in those societies, in Lima Lara society, the generous gift would incur an obligation to repay even more, and is considered an insult in some circumstances. Right? So you see that participants, they come to this lab into the experiment, but they carried their cultural influence, their conventions, the mindset to the lab, right? So even though it's one shot, it's anonymous, but your experience outside the experiment would definitely have an influence on your behavior, right? So these illustrate the cultural differences. So what are the implications of ultimatum game? People care about fairness. Right, so that's why in the next section, we will introduce this idea of social preferences. So unfair offers are likely to be rejected. So because of this, when you engage in a negotiation, right, try to use ultimatum game with minimally, at least with discretion. Right? So in most negotiation, parties would take turns to make offers and counter offers. And making an ultimatum game in those process is usually not the best move, because ultimatum is considered a threat, and your ultimatum may not be credible, and offers cannot be changed if it gets rejected. If you mention that this is ultimatum game, the final offer, you decide whether to accept it or not. So in negotiation, try to avoid ultimatum offers. So here is a way to reframe this situation, right? So raise your offer to 65,000, then I promise to work for you. It's better than the ultimatum that give me 65,000 or I quit. Right? So that's the implication. Now, that's the discussion of the interesting game called ultimatum game. And one important implication we can get from ultimatum game is that people care not only about their own payoff, but also the payoffs, the outcomes of others, and probably also care about the intention behind other people's action. Right? So that is what we call social preferences. Right? Social preferences are also called other regarding preferences, meaning that you not only care about your actions, your outcomes, but also the other people's action, intentions, and their outcomes. So social preferences are referring to human tendency not only care about one's own material payoff, but also others' payoff and the intentions behind actions that produce the payoff. Right? So there are two important components. One part of social preferences is distributional preferences. So this part of preference is only outcome-based, meaning your utility depends on how outcomes are distributed across different individuals, not only yourself, but also other individuals. And also, it has this reciprocity preferences. It's intention-based, meaning your utility depends on the perceived kindness or unkindness of others' intention. Right? So for example, in ultimatum game, you not only care about the distribution, you also care about the intention of the proposer. Right? So if the proposer keep just $9 to themselves and only $1 to you, I mean, that would consider as unkind action. So you will consider that as a bad intention. I mean, that would decrease your utility. You probably would likely to punish the other person. Right? So distributional preferences and reciprocity preferences, they are two important components of social preferences. So in today's lecture, we will focus on distributional preferences. So distributional preferences capture concerns for fairness, inequality aversion, efficiency, and max-min principles. So max-min principles is the so-called Rawlsian principle, meaning that you want to make the worst off in the society to be better off. You care about the most worst off person in the group. Right? So you want to maximize the worst off. Right? So there are three representative models. We will not elaborate on this. Here are just some models if you to read if you are interested, right? So if you continue your master degree to study behavioral economics, then the models are probably the things that you will study more. Here we'll just briefly discuss Furr and Schmidt model of inequality aversion, right? So the other two models are similar, and Bolton-Oakenfeld's model is quite similar to Furr and Schmidt, and Charnis and Ribin's model is basically adding this welfare and efficiency concerns to inequality aversion. Right? So here we'll just mention this Furr and Schmidt model from 1999. So according to Furr and Schmidt, people care about equality. So basically, if there's inequality among you and other players, your utility will be decreased. Right? So this decrease in utility is represented by the following utility function. Right? So here, your utility of having this outcome X is not only depending on your own payoff. Xi is your own payoff, your person I. The person I's utility depends on not only its own payoff, but also receive some disutility, a reduction in utility when there are inequality. Right? So here, the other person's payoff is greater than you, you will have a decrease of your utility. If your payoff Xi is greater than the other person, then you will also have some disutility. You don't like inequality, right? Giving all other things equal, suppose the material payoff for yourself is the same, you would like equality of payoff between different players, right? So another way of expressing this utility function is to have this conditional expression, right? So if your payoff is less than the other player's payoff, then the difference between your payoff and the other payoff will be expressed as disutility with the coefficients alpha I. If your payoff is greater than the other player's payoff, then the difference would generate a disutility that is multiplied by the parameter beta I. So here, alpha represents envy parameter. It captures this disadvantageous inequality aversion. When the other person is better off than you, you probably have this envy that will decrease your utility, and guilt parameter captures advantageous inequality aversion. If you are better off than the other person, you will have this guilt. I mean, you want to make the other person better off, right? So in the original assumption, the beta I is assumed to be less than 1 and greater than 0, or greater than or equal to 0. So beta I less than 1, meaning that you care about other people's payoff, but you care your own payoff more than the other person's payoff. That's why beta is less than 1. And also, it's assumed that people care more about disadvantages into advantages inequality. Right? So this model was proposed to only model inequality aversion. But later experiment has demonstrated this concern for efficiency. Right? So concern for efficiency can also reflect it in this model by adjusting to the parameters. Even though the original assumption is that beta is less than 1, alpha is greater than beta, but if you incorporate some of the concerns for efficiency, then we would observe this violation of the previous assumptions, right? So if people care about efficiency, then that would reduce the value of alpha, meaning people are more willing to accept efficient inequality, even though you are at a disadvantage. So you are not that concerned about people get better off, right? Because that increased the total payoff between you and the other person. So efficiency concern also increase beta, meaning that you are more tolerant for efficient advantageous inequality. If the other person's payoff decreased by 1 and you are able to increase your payoff by 2, I mean, that's make the joint payoff higher. So that would actually decrease the guilt parameter, right? You are not that concerned about other people's disadvantage. So you may be wondering what type of distributional preferences people have. So here is one interesting experiment with 176 subjects, and they would make a wide range of dictator game, right? And it's not a simple split of some money in these games. Basically, there is a budget and there is a price, right? Sometimes, you have like 10 tokens to distribute. Sometimes one token is worth like $3 to you and $4 to the other. Sometimes the token would worth $5 to you and $1 to the other. So the price of allocating these tokens between two players would be different, right? So by varying the price of allocation and with the same budget line, you can measure people's preferences. So in this experiment, the details you can read on your own. So basically, it categorizes players, participant, into different types of players, right? So we observe 47% of players, they're selfish. They only care about their own payoff. They do not exhibit too much social preferences. And 30% of the players exhibit this rousing preferences, meaning that they try to maximize the payoff of the worse off. Right? And also 22% of the players, they are utilitarian. They want to maximize the joint payoff between them and other player. Right? So here are the distribution. You see that, I mean, most people among the three groups are selfish. Right? They do not have strong social preferences, but we do see a significant proportion of people, they are rousing, they want to make the worse off, and some of them are utilitarian. They want to maximize the efficiency, the joint payoff of the two players. All right, so we also find some neural evidence of inequality aversion, meaning that we do have neural foundations for the social preferences. And also we observe this fairness concern, the social preferences among primates, like capuchin monkeys and chimps. So to summarize, behavior in ultimatum games show that people care for fairness in addition to monetary gains, and also people exhibit preferences for equality and efficiency. Right?